Recovery Road Trip: Navigating Healing One Destination at a Time, featuring Patti Clark. Ever wonder what a road trip for recovery would look like? In Recovery Road Trip, a journal for your journey, author Patti Clark authors a unique, interactive guide designed to support individuals on their personal path to recovery. We explore how journaling can be a powerful tool for reflection, healing, and self-discovery, and how this book offers encouragement, structure, and inspiration for anyone working through addiction or supporting someone who is. Whether you're in recovery, a professional in the field, or simply curious about the role creativity plays in healing, this conversation offers practical insights and heartfelt stories from the road to recovery. Patti Clark is the award-winning author of This Way Up: 7 Tools for Unleashing Your Creative Self and Transforming Your Life. She has also been featured on TVNZ's Breakfast Show, and her work has been featured in numerous publications, including The Wall Street Journal, The Boston Globe, The Mindful Word, and Thrive Global. Her own experience as a middle-aged woman in recovery is deeply reflected in this book, and is what inspired her to write it. You can find more about her by visiting www.patticlark.org.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you've joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Welcome, Patti Clark, to Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast. I really appreciate you joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Recovery Road Trip: Finding Purpose and Connection on the Journey Home. For listeners, can you talk a little bit about the premise of the book?
Sure. How far back to go? I'm in recovery. I got sober the first time, clean and sober the first time in 1988. And I was clean and sober for almost 13 years, and I relapsed. And I relapsed for almost 13 years. And I was out in that other world out there for almost as long as I was sober. And when I came back in, I was really curious about other women who had relapsed. And so I started asking women I met in meetings or online, and just asking about their experience. And then COVID hit, and I was on meetings all over the world, and so started asking more and more about that experience. And I met so many women that had such interesting stories that I started just writing them down, just out of interest, and hearing some of the similarities that flowed and some of the differences. And it was so compelling for me, and I would tell people about it, and they would say, "Oh God, you've got to write this down." So I ended up writing it as what's called in literary terms an allegorical narrative. It was not my story. I am not Meg, the protagonist. However, a lot of Meg's experiences are mine, and then a lot of the people that she meets and the things that happen to her come from the stories of women that I spoke to.
So curious, how was that process for you to write about some of the things that you've gone through and also what you read for others, but you write it in a way of this person? How was that for you? Was that challenging at times? Did that what was that experience for you to write it in that style?
Well, you're a writer as well, so it's challenging at times. But in terms of that style, to be honest, Andrew, I find that the easiest way to write. I find that telling a story is the easiest way for me to give information, talk about information, and also sort of when I'm writing, I can get lost in that story. If I was trying to just do a self-help how-to book, I would get all jumbled up and feel insecure and have major imposter syndrome and not be able to go there at all and stumble over myself. Whereas when I was doing this, I would get lost in it, and actually at times, like hear the story. And there's one character in my book who is a character who talks a lot. She talks a lot, and she's somewhat psychic and kind of dingy. And she was in my head for the weeks when I was writing this chapter, and I wanted to just say, "Shut up." That she kept going and going almost, and I'd type as fast as I could. It was like taking dictation. It was crazy. But that's the chapter I love most of the book, because I felt so like she was sitting at the table with me, and I wanted to just like shut it.
Was
But
that the one with the energy?
yes, exactly. Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. I remember that chapter.
yes. Oh, awesome. I'm glad it's memorable. That
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
what the way that she talked, almost without punctuation. I was literally typing as fast as I could. And literally when I was typing without punctuation. But when my editor looked at it, she said, that's just impossible. You have to put punctuation in there, because the readers are not in your head and they don't hear Saskia screaming at you. So no, you have to put punctuation in there. And so I did, but it really was yeah, fascinating. And there was another woman that I didn't experience, but a woman that I met online that was talking about her experience. A real dour older woman that stood up, and I could almost see her like a little prune face. And this woman that was talking to me on Zoom described her so succinctly that when I was writing her, I actually like felt her cloying energy. And it was very, very visceral. So those experiences were really fun, really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. The one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, there's a lot of books, memoirs, things written on the subject. And what stood out with Recovery Road Trip was the character, if I remember, started out like they were sober when the book began. And so many of the books and stories start out with, using of a substance or engaging in behavior like gambling, and it gets into the how it started, and it talks about, like some of the progression, all that. So like it tends to be sometimes like two sides, two tales of the engaging in it, had the having the issues, and then the recovery part of it is like the second part. But yours started with sobriety. And I really wanted to know, was that on purpose? Was there
Yes.
some meaning to that? Because that's not what I would say common for all the books and stories about this topic in particular.
Yeah. Most memoirs or stories about it are often, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. So and that's great, and we love hearing those. But this story was the part that was very much about me was when I got sober again. And well, before I relapsed, and then when I got sober again, there was a lot of me and women I met. I was running workshops and talked a lot about this with them, but also online, saying, now what? And there was a real feeling of, there's that pink cloud, and there's that, oh my God, this is wonderful and everything's terrific. And then life happens. When, and I get a lot of pushback from this, Andrew. Well, I'll tell you, I get a lot of pushback because there are many people in 12 step that don't want to hear that life isn't solved by 12 step. And my experience is that it's not, that it got us sober, which is awesome, got us clean, awesome. And all the things that we drank and used to get away from are now right in our face. We're feeling everything intensely. And so once we don't have that to stop the feelings, then we have to do the work, right? We have to do the work. And for me, a lot of the stuff in that I talked about literally happened to me, where I would go to meetings and I would cry and I would say, I need more. And I would be in a room with especially older men that were very pedantic and big book thumpers that would say, shut up, come to meetings, listen, don't drink, and you'll be fine. And I was like, but I'm not fine. I'm going crazy here. And so that's where I wanted to start in the book, was Meg arriving and feeling lost and telling her friend, I it's not, I'm not feeling that oomph. I'm feeling lost. I'm feeling um, unhappy. I don't know what I want to do. And I know drinking and using doesn't help, but I need something more. And and so she's on that quest. She's on the road trip. She's searching for the more without drugs and alcohol. And that's a lot of my own personal story and what I heard from other women, after they relapsed and came back and knew the drill and got sober again, but still were feeling like, and yeah.
I
So
like
that,
it because I think there's a lot of, and I think it comes from a space of many times like things are getting problematic, even chaotic. There's desperation for the behavior to stop. But I think in a way it gives a lot of like wrong messages where you hear things like, well, if you stop, everything will be okay. Or if you no longer use, like life will get better. And I usually tell people like, the moment you stop or someone stops, like it's really, really hard. Like now they've given up something that even though it may have been destructive, it still serves some purpose. It may
oh,
have been
absolutely.
it may have been something that numbed a feeling, or it helped them escape a situation that they never knew or thought of how they could have dealt with the situation. And now all of a sudden, I kind of like I've said it before in like a very earlier podcast episode of mine. I was like, it's like kicking the can down the road. And then once you pick up that can, it's pretty damaged, but then all of a sudden the dam that's been built up breaks, and now there's floods of emotions. There's the problems even come, crashing down even more without the behavior of the substance to numb, escape, or avoid. So I don't want to you don't want to scare people away from wanting to make that change or make those decisions, but I think it's important that it just doesn't stop there. Like there's a lot to have to deal with when you get sober, and it isn't just all your problems get fixed and everything's taken care of. Like that's a time where a lot of people struggle, and I think people don't always feel safe to say that.
Yep. And as I said, I've got a lot of pushback. People don't like hearing people say there's more that's needed than the 12 steps. The 12 steps got me sober. I'm grateful beyond measure, grateful beyond measure. But like you and I have just been talking about, all that shit that I drank and used to stop feeling because my life was a mess and I had I grew up in a very dysfunctional family and had a lot of shit that came down. And I stopped drinking. I'm grateful beyond measure. But then I was feeling all of it. Gabor Mate talks a lot about that trauma, that trauma. We drank, used, chose a behavior so that we would not feel all of the stuff from the trauma. And it did a great job for us. It did a great job. But then it didn't. And our life started falling apart and exploding. So it's great that we've given up the behavior or the drug or the drink, but the emotions and the pain are still there. And and we have to find what's going to work for us. And thus the road trip that Meg goes on.
Yeah, it's in, I love seeing some of the places, some places I've been to, even Madison. I'm from Wisconsin, so it was so great to read, because the story is, going on this trip by herself. I think one of the quotes is later is in the end that I really liked was recovery is recovering something, finding it again, And what happens in recovery is that we can find ourselves again. And I like the road trip part because like that is like a journey. Like that
Mm.
is something that takes that's not just a one night discovery or like that just happens out of nowhere. Like it took a lot to get to that point for her to learn things, have some experiences. We talked about the one with the energy healer, but it's not like everything was great for her even on the trip. It took trials and triumphs, but at the same time, it was amazing to read about not just the places she went to, but also the people she connected with. And every chapter had a really great takeaway of from what she learned. How did you put all those together with like each chapter had this almost like this ingredient or this takeaway? I think it was secret, right? Is that how it was?
Yeah, life secret.
Life secret. Like, what was your process going into how that'd be formatted and really putting together those really main key ones?
Well, first of all, thank you. And also, I really love hearing your feedback because it was written with women in mind. And so I love hearing a man's take on it that it sounds like you still could relate to it and find it compelling enough to want to read it and not feel like it was too female oriented or too chiclety or whatever. So thank you. I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Um, so there were a couple of pieces to it. I used to run workshops for women, and a lot of what is in the book comes from the workshops that I ran, and so I knew there had to be certain elements. I'm a journaler. I always have journaled since high school, and so I knew that really works for me. That sort of taking out those pieces of whatever's going on so I can put them on paper and look at them, externalizing that internal process. So I knew that had to be a part of it. And I knew that creativity and the looking at creativity had to be a part of it. Um, and to be honest, what happened was I was pulling out pieces that I thought, okay, I wanted something about unity because that's so important in terms of 12 step and in terms of just that connection. And I really wanted to include Johann Hari and his whole thing about the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And I love that quote. So I knew I wanted connection and unity. And then I knew I wanted something about kindness in that largest sense of the word. I knew I wanted love. So it's like I had certain ideas and I was writing them down. And as I was going, I was about halfway through writing notes and making a map. I was drawing a map. I was making notes. I was sticking post-its up. And honestly, I was about halfway through the book and I don't want to say the word because people that haven't read it, I don't want to give it away, but I saw that end piece of what all of the aspects came together to mean. And I went, and so I ended up realigning a few things and adding a few things to make it work. So it really was a uncovering of pieces and the way I write is very fluid. I'll get an idea, I'll put it on a post-it, I'll put it up, I'll rip a piece of paper, I'll put a piece of glue tack up. I had a big blotter paper that I had the map on, and I was making notes of things that happened in each place. So
Oh, that's amazing.
it was very
Yeah,
organic. Yeah.
yeah. That and as I started reading some chapters, I'm like, okay, like now I kind of know how at the end each one was. But what I liked about it tying into like discovery was as I was reading chapters, I was trying to think of what is this one going to represent? Like what is this one going to be? And why I like it is because I think that's what happens more often is we can tell people what some of the important things are. We can say it all the time. We can put it on posters. We can reiterate 1,000 times. Like, but for a lot of people, it's when they experience certain things, that stuff then starts to resonate. Like so your character was going through this stuff, and then what was the takeaway, or what is it that really stood out was this versus, well, I know like, trust is important. Okay, well, like, but then instead someone going through an experience where now all of a sudden they've had that to realize how important it is or what it meant to them and all that. So I felt like your story put it in a way of what is it that we often experience versus trying to like convince the person that this is
Mm.
what you need to do, or try to tell them, hey, like, trust me, like this is this is what I know works, or like this is what will be the way. Your character had to experience things to then realize the value and what it meant for the recovery, for them to see how that works. So I really appreciate that, because to me it was learning, it was discovery, it was finding out what was going on versus, trying to say this is what it is and now go do it.
Right, right. And like I said, I couldn't write a book like that. Number one, I'd have imposter syndrome and feel like I can't tell you. My life was a mess. I don't know. I fell over 5 times and got up, but that is, I wanted her to be unfolding it and making sense of things. And then that's why there's the part 2 of the book, which is the journaling part, where people can go and figure it out for themselves, because just because that piece worked for Meg doesn't necessarily mean that's going to resonate for you. And I had one woman write to me and say that she loved Meg's story, but she wanted to share with me what actually happened when she did the journaling, because different things unfolded that were different than Meg. And she said, so I really wanted to share it. And I loved that, because she came up with some stuff that was a whole different experience, because it was her pulling out her internal process. And I that's what I would hope, because I don't have answers. We have our own answers, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, that's a question I wanted to ask you, was have you gotten, because it's as a an author putting this book together and having a big part of it being, it's not the second part with the journaling is really for, the reader to do, but you don't know if someone's doing it or if someone's using that. Did they read the first half and didn't do that? So I was very curious if you've gotten any feedback from people who did do the journaling, because that's a big unknown unless people kind of share that with you.
Exactly, exactly. Some people, I've had several people send me photos on social media of them doing the work. And one woman that I know personally who got my book, and she didn't journal, she did artwork throughout. She got a big blank book and just did artwork for each area and what came up, and shared a lot of it with me, and I loved that. And another woman said that she made a vow to go to the beach once a week for 12 weeks. And she didn't write every day like is recommended, but she wrote in her journal at the beach about the topic of that week. And so I love that. It's like, make it yours. You don't have to follow this. I gave it to you in a way that I hope is helpful, so that it's easier, but make it make sense. And I'm quite certain that, a lot of people just read it and say, yeah, 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 I'll get to that later, and never do it. And that's cool, whatever works.
Yeah, I think that's, and part of me is like that autonomy that, this is sharing a story, but also this isn't all the answers. This isn't all like this isn't exactly like part of it. You're trying to reiterate is like discovery, even for the reader, discovering then for themselves, what it is that's going on, and having that journaling exercises and structure to do that like helps, because there are times where I think we do try to convince people of, we've seen a way work, we've seen something be successful. It may have been through our own experience, it might have been through someone that we've helped in their experience, or what we've heard is doing it, and we sometimes so badly want to convince people that there is a way, this is the way. I think people struggle sometimes with working with someone or giving space to someone while they're on their journey trying to discover. Like we want to, you know, point the direction of where we think that's the best way to go, or we want to shine a light on the path that from our experience we think is going to be helpful. It's not easy to sit with someone who is on that journey and uncertain what to do. And I'm curious because I think your book kind of talks about that. Like we didn't know where she was going to go. We didn't know what was necessarily going to happen. Um, but part of it was going alongside of her on this journey and not trying to be that convinced to go do this or do that. And neither the characters in the story didn't seem to either do that as well. As I'm talking about it and thinking about the characters, I didn't hear a lot of like the characters being like, well, you have to do this or you must do this. There's a lot of like support and encourage, like, I'm here for you. This is what's going on. Um, some connection, but not a lot of like, they're the experts trying to direct her on what she had to do. What are your thoughts as I just kind of brain dumped all that on you?
No, I love it. I love hearing people's, experience of it. It's awesome. Thank you. Yes, because as I say again, I didn't want it to be a how-to book because I don't know how to. I have no idea, and I certainly don't know how to for you. So this is a character. Here was her experience, and I didn't want anyone to be bossing her and telling her what to do. The closest one that came to that was Saskia, but she ends up having this lovely side to her that Meg learns something from, because Meg went into it with so much judgment, which is definitely part of my personality, and so much, like, oh, you're crazy making. And yet by the end, Meg is softening and she's able to look back at it and realize, about that judgmentalism. And when she goes into Lincoln, Nebraska and has all of this judgment about, good God, why would anyone want to live here? And
I think I underlined that quote. I couldn't imagine myself living there, so I decided that everyone that did choose to live there was inherently flawed.
yes.
And then, but then goes into talking about after listening to them, the women at the meeting at the going to the sunken garden, and perhaps like my eyes and heart opened up a bit. Um, a commitment to myself to be more accepting, less judgmental, another path for my quilt. Um, but I thought that was, yeah, that was very, um, I like that. I underlined that because I thought that was really important to stand out about like recognizing where that bias or that flaw came in of how she viewed this entire town.
Exactly, exactly. And and I hate to say it, but I have done that, driven through and thought, oh my God, anyone that lives in this town just must be blah, 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 fill in the blank, all this judgmentalism. And it's like, oh my God, Patty, stop. Um, and so putting that on Meg was a wonderful, like I can dump it on her. And as Meg went through it and learned, I softened, which was a really lovely byproduct of that. And yeah, it's an interesting process, having that experience of learning from my own characters, right? And I love the fact that you noticed that nobody really said, here's what you do. Even when she's in Boulder, Colorado with the professor that teaches, addiction studies and has all of this experience, she's still just sharing her own experience, strength, and hope, saying, I got into this because of my own mess. I started doing this because I, thought I had it together, and then I fell apart. So, because for me, and I think for most of us in recovery, that's why speaker meetings are great. We often learn something at a speaker meeting because they are just sharing their own experience, strength, and hope. I have never been to a speaker meeting where someone stands up in front of us and tells us exactly what we should be doing. It doesn't work like that. It's sort of like, here's something that I did that worked for me, you know?
Yeah, Meg, there was times where she struggled and I think there were times where she contemplated like the trip. There were times where she thought of calling it quits, not knowing, and what was amazing was the characters simply were just being there, knowing that she wasn't alone, that they supported her, but also they weren't saying you have to do this, you must do this. Like they provided like encouragement of believing like you can continue with your journey, you can keep doing what you're doing, but they weren't being directive on like, well, you need to specifically go do this. And I think another thing that I highlighted that was in trying to think what chapter this was. Oh, the one on trauma, for sure, addiction and connection to Boulder, Colorado, was it takes a lot of work to wake up as a human being. It's a lot easier to stay asleep than to wake up. Like I felt like that was such a like sometimes we point out weaknesses and flaws versus how much effort it took someone to wake up, to keep going, to show up for a counseling session, to show up for treatment, to just go to a meeting or to make a phone call, that there's a lot of effort to do those things that sometimes we say, well, you should do that. Like that, it doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean it's not comes with challenges or obstacles. I always say to people, sometimes someone has to take two buses just to get somewhere for like an hour meeting or to get a medication. Like that's not easy. And I think sometimes people need to be more recognized and praised for the human being that they are to get to where they needed to get to or get done what they needed to. That we don't recognize that enough in
Yeah,
in people.
absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, it's, um, it is so much easier to stay asleep. I mean, and I know, not naming any names, and again, I'll probably get shit for this, but I know a lot of people in recovery that choose to just stay asleep. That they say, I know one woman that talks about going to 5 meetings a day every day. And I'm like, oh, honey, get a life. But there I am, judgment again. but that she has found this thing, and so that's where she does life, to the point of, I don't want to do anything else.
Mm.
And I know it sounds so judgmental. I'm listening to myself. Oh, Patty, stop. Anyway, um, it's it's a lot easier to not embrace change. Let's put
Yeah,
it that way.
yeah,
Um, and that once we get clean and sober, and we do start to wake up, usually for most of us, it takes about a year to finally get the cobwebs and the mush out of our head. And then after that first year, a lot of stuff happens. We feel a lot of things. That's why I really appreciate people like you that are therapists that are working in this area, because there's a lot of stuff there. You know, People that haven't got a lot of stuff generally don't become addicted to substances, alcohol, sex, porn, gambling, all of that stuff. We, unless there's some stuff in there, we don't usually become addicts. And so once we take away the behaviors and the substances, thank God for people like you that are going to sit down and say, okay, yeah, now your head's clear. Now we've got the work to do, because it's true. And a lot of change happens, and we start to wake up when we stop drinking, using, doing those behaviors. But it's a lot more waking up to happen after we've been clean and sober for a while. And as you would know, as a counselor, we might give up the drugs and the alcohol, but then what comes next? Oh, here's some sugar. And then what comes next is, porn. We hear time and again, and screens. Good Lord, shopping. So many women that get clean and sober, and man, they just go into major debt. And so suddenly there are these mostly women, without getting gender specific, that have been clean and sober for a while that end up in Debtors Anonymous because of the fact that they've gone to soothe themselves with shopping or eating or sugar or sex. We've given up that mind altering bit and found another behavior, which I'm sure you know well as a therapist in this field.
How you mentioned that whole part from once like it stops and then sort of, I think how it's portrayed, how people think it is, like it's just your story just highlights so much that it's not that narrative of I stopped and now things are, really great, much better. I think one thing that stood out with, and it didn't happen so much in your book, but I am curious about your thoughts of, I think it's not just like the individuals who think that or may struggle with that, but also family members and loved ones. I've noticed a lot too, where they're in my office, there's someone there who's there, they love a spouse, significant other who's struggling with, alcohol, substances, gambling. Their idea is once this stops, everything will be great. Like, if they just stop this, everything would be, and part of me sometimes goes like, is that really kind of like where we're at with it? This behavior wasn't like everything then is picture perfect. But I've seen a lot of times relationships, family dynamics struggle when someone gets sober. Now you're talking about tying in a whole family systems dynamic, which is the therapist part of me. But I think that does play a lot into like what you've talked about is family members and loved ones. And I'll even say expand it to like probation officers or, people involved in several different systems that we have when it comes to this subject, where it is kind of spoken that you just stop or you don't do this anymore and everything will get better. But I don't always see that for the families, for the couples. Like there is still a lot to do when that happens. So I'm just curious, like I said, it wasn't as much in Meg's story, but like I'm just curious how you think about that when it's not just the person on this journey, it's not just the individual, but when we're talking about a person's a part of a family, a person's a part of a system, like that brings about a lot of interesting things too to consider with this.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we're talking about bringing in codependency and all of those layers as well, because generally speaking, the person that gets together as a partner with an addict, whatever the substance or behavior is, they've got their own stuff going on, and as that's how we got Al-Anon and and Codependence Anonymous, etc. But so dealing with the codependency as well, and then when you do take away the behavior that we could have the relationship. We have the relationship between two people, and then there's the addiction. And so the addiction can take a lot of the heat in a relationship. And you take out the addiction, and now it's just the people. And now a lot of other things come to the surface, right? Um, yeah, absolutely. And most, oh gosh, almost everyone that I know that's in recovery came from a dysfunctional family. I'm an adult child of an alcoholic. Both of my parents drank. My mother died of alcoholism when I was 16. My sister is an alcoholic in recovery, thank you. And I followed in my sister's footsteps into recovery, grateful. But because of the system that we were from, there's so much there, and I certainly am carrying my own level of codependence from growing up in that system. And when I gave up, when I stopped drinking, there was definitely stuff between my husband and I that was certain control issues that I would acquiesce to because I felt guilty. I felt like you know, I was the problem with the alcohol, etc. And so suddenly, when alcohol was taken out of the equation, we had to look at certain behaviors within our relationship that were really unhealthy. We had to go to couples counseling and look at that and say, okay, yeah, that these things have developed over time, and alcohol was certainly a part of it, but there's some major dysfunction here that we need to really peel back. And, grateful beyond measure that we managed to get through it, but a lot of couples don't, as I'm
Yeah,
sure you'll see.
yeah. I was to me, I'm almost like there could almost be a a story about the family member going on their journey through this and
Yeah,
what that would be like, because I think that's where um it just brings about such significant changes, and it's now all the work, you know, that we've done and seen it. It's to us, it's kind of clear that like this relationship will change. This family is going to go through some changes, and everyone thinks it's going to be the good changes because like now the problem or the issue's gone away, but the recovery brings about new changes. And I've talked a lot about family members and loved ones going through their own recovery from it, but in reading your recovery road trip, it's like they're going through their own journey, traveling through and figuring out ways of how that's going to work too. So I did find myself thinking about that because of that whole dynamic. So thank you for engaging in that line of thought of mine.
oh, absolutely. And that's huge. And it's not just partners, although that's the one where it often plays out, but siblings,
Yeah,
friends,
yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I had a lot of friends that would just either that were good friends that said, "Oh, thank God you've stopped drinking, now you'll be, fill in the blank." And then when there were still problems, it was sort of like, okay, we've got to talk through this or not, or possibly not stay together as friends. And I know everybody that's gotten into recovery has lost a lot of friendships because alcohol was part of that relationship. And when it's taken away, a lot of times that relationship doesn't survive.
yeah. Can I want to go back to one of the things that got brought up because I know you said you've had some pushback from certain parts of it. And it may have been, directly from something like maybe the 12 step community. But part of your book, the character goes to meetings and is going to so how do we like balance that where and here's why I love your recovery road trip part is, to me, I'm very grateful that we're hearing more of the term many paths.
Mm,
Like, I am grateful. I mean, I've been a counselor for over 20 years. And as I say, as I grew up in the profession, like it was a lot more of this one way or this way. And now we're hearing several ways. Many paths has become more of a phrase in the last couple of years, I would say. But here's where I still say I think we're still missing a point is I look at each individual as their own path. Like, I don't look at it as 12 steps is the path. Like, I look at all these things as like these are interventions, these are supports, these are tools, these are techniques, these are all things that we bring to people's path or that we bring alongside a journey to support them. But I I really try to shy away from that. Like, I don't own this path. I don't
that's
own
right.
this. I don't like this isn't I'm not trying to have it where someone must follow these things that I'm saying is the way. My goal is to take everything that I have, everything that I know, or everything that I am aware of to bring that to the person and join them in their journey as long as they'll have me. Or if there's something they want to take and go on, then hey, that's great. So I feel like your book sort of helped capture that because like this
Mm,
was her path, her journey,
mm,
not for us to find a way to say she should follow this path. Like her path is it's her life, it's her journey. That's what it is. Um, so I'm just curious, how can we get to a better spot? Like I think your book helps to do that. So thank you, because I feel like I can use that as an example to be like, this is sort of how we should be really looking at how we approach people and work with people in their journey without trying to get like this ownership or this like it's this way or that way. It's like to me, as many things as possible or as many things we can provide or highlight or offer and then let the person choose is going to be best for them as they because we're not always going to be a part of it. I'm not going to be a part of everyone's journey. There's times where therapy is gone or I'm not going to be around anymore. They don't need it or want it. So how can we get into a better place like that? Because I feel like your book does resemble that in some
Mm.
way.
First of all, thank you. Thank you very much. And this is a great conversation because, and I think that's the answer that I would give you is how do we move forward having conversations like this? The pushback that I've had is from people who are pedantic, my way or the highway, big book thumpers. This is what you do. If you've got a problem with alcohol, you go to AA, period. If you've got a problem with any kind of drugs, you go to NA, period. If you've got it, you go to here, period. You work the 12 steps in each program. You don't do anything else. Stop drinking, go to meetings, sit down and shut up. And that's where in my opinion, that's where the problem is. Where we start to heal that, in my opinion, is exactly what you're talking about, Andrew, is having these conversations, saying it is a great tool. It helped me stop drinking, and that is miraculous in and of itself. Did it make me all better? Oh, hell no. you know, I'm still a chocolate mess, and there's still so much work to do. But it got me to a point where I could start to do the work because I wasn't such an absolute mess in insanity. But we have to allow each person, right? Not everyone grew up in an alcoholic home with a mother that died when she was 16. That's my journey, and I had a lot of stuff to clean up with that. But somebody else had a lot of violence, and somebody else had a lot of mental illness, and somebody else struggled without money. And, so there's all these pieces, and each pathway is going to be very different. And the 12 steps can help them give up the alcohol and find support while they're doing that. But then they've got a whole life ahead of them for dealing with things. And, exactly as you said, there are going to be different tools, different things that they will get from different individuals. And the first thing I always recommend is find a good therapist, find somebody that you can work with to start to uncover this stuff. Find something with creativity, because creativity will help you unleash so much that's inside of you and connect you to that higher place, because that's what creativity does for us, in my opinion. And so if you can do both of those things, in my opinion, you can start to heal. Because again, the pushback is going to a meeting is not enough for me. Maybe not for everybody, but for me, it's not. It's one tool that was, fucking fantastic, a great tool. And I needed it to get where I am, to a point where I could start walking down a new path. I needed it to save my life. However, I also needed a lot more to get to a place where I started to heal and feel whole.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I do when I try, I like having more of those conversations about the many paths and we're making progress. We're still not where I see a spot that we could be in. And I really I guess I would say I felt seen when reading your book because to me it sort of did highlight capturing with the road trip, story and going on this journey was really like no one else is going to have a journey like that. Like this is her journey, this is her story, this is her life. This is her path, which is what she's discovering. And if it's telling everyone to go down the same one, what discovery really is there? I mean,
Yeah.
it's we're gonna put more lights on it, we're gonna make it more visible, we're gonna like you're not gonna be able to miss it. But we know like it's not working because like people don't go there. They fall like, and that's where I think we're missing it is it creates sometimes more gaps for people versus we recognize they're on their path constantly. Then our goal is to meet them where they're at and provide these things, and we can do that. So I think it's a great way to end this, but also final thoughts from you or final takeaways that you want listeners to know or walk away with about the Recovery Road Trip book.
Gosh, this is a perfect place to sort of stop, and I just love what you've said there, that it is about every individual's journey, and that I hope that the readers find Meg's journey inspirational to an extent, but it's exactly what you said. It's not their journey. Hopefully the journaling workbook at the end will help them discover some pieces, but whatever works for you, it's like the main thing is finding that connection, finding others that are mirroring back to you what you need, finding that connection to create that wholeness.
Yeah, thank you. The conversation's been amazing. The book, reading it was so many takeaways from it, different than so many other books that I've read on the subject. So it was super incredible to have you on and talk about it and appreciate everything about it. So we're going to make sure the listeners have links to it and can find out more to read it, but not just read it, but also doing the journaling and realizing that this is not the how-to, but this is a way for them to discover themselves what their way is. So thank you for all that and for joining the show.
Oh, Andrew, it's just been an absolute pleasure. And an hour has flown by. I can't believe it. I looked at the time and went, oh my gosh, I just wanted to tell you that I have listened to several of the podcasts and just wanted to really commend you as an excellent podcast and interviewer, because you listen and you ask wonderful questions that get people, you get it all juicy. And I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, it's why listeners, I've really never said this before, but I'm going to say now, but it's why I require reading the book first, because I want to be one that I read and I can dive into and understand. And also then when I have an author like yourself on that, I can talk about a book that I've read and that I've kind of picked apart and asked questions in a way to like endorse it. And I don't want to have someone on who I've never read the book and haven't had to ask those questions. So it's one of the reasons why I make it a requirement, but I think it adds to I don't think the conversation you and I would have been the same if I didn't read it.
Yep, absolutely.
I think it just adds a lot to it with that. So I do appreciate that willingness to send a copy and have me be able to read it ahead of time, because it makes this conversation that much more enjoyable.
Sure does. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So thanks again. We'll have links and everything to where audience members can find you and get your book and learn more about you. And we'll just continue to work on discovering more paths for people on their recovery road trip.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's AndrewJschreier.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media, Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.